We're going to hear a speech from Mitch Singer, and then we're going to have some time to ask him some questions. Mitch Singer is the president of DECE, better known as the Ultraviolet Consortium. It's a 75-member group, which I hope you've all heard of. How many people have heard of Ultraviolet? Good. How many people have actually bought a film that has a UV note on it and knew what to do with it? Right, hands are up, sort of. Good. Couple hands, not too many. Right, oh, sorry, do you have your clicker? There we go. So Mitch is the president of DECE, or Ultraviolet. Basically, they are a group that is trying to do open standards and digital rights portability across devices. Very keen area of interest, obviously, for studios. Up until this March, Mitch was a senior executive at Sony. He was actually at Sony for 23 years, count them, 23 years. One of his roles there, he was Chief Digital Strategy Officer at Sony Pictures, which is how he obviously got involved in Ultraviolet. And he's been one of really the poster child for Ultraviolet for a long time, a very good advocate of Ultraviolet. Mitch also continues to be a copyright lawyer, which is where he started his career. He's a keen advocate of making it much easier for consumers to access and even own their digital media assets, which I think is a very good thing. Since leaving Sony, Mitch has become involved with a number of other companies. I think he's involved with or on the board of about 9 now. Is it about 9? Yeah. So he's a busy guy, travels around the world a lot, has a lot of air miles, I'm told. He is involved with companies that are in areas everywhere from audio encoding to watermarking. Mitch is, in my view, a visionary in this space. He is a mover and a shaker as well. It's a good combination for us to end this conference on. He's going to talk about disruption, about home entertainment trends, and what we have to look forward to in the future. So please welcome Mitch Singer.
Well, thank you. You know, I think, for those of you, obviously, you've spent all day here as well, there seems to be a theme that we saw in the very beginning, and it started with create great programming, you know, with the best writers and stories, look for efficiencies in pre-production and production and post-production, try to find the best way for consumers to discover what you have to sell. And I think a lot of this is happening right now is because we're in the middle of a very disruptive cycle, and the industry is looking for ways to lower costs, increase their margins at a time when the margins are shrinking. And when companies are disrupted, when they're in the middle of this disruption, they tend to fight a lot against the disruption. And I think what happened, we only have to look at the music industry in many ways to see what can happen in a very disruptive environment where, you know, they face the collision of internet penetration, a new compression technology, MP3, a centralized system called Napster where they could access all the music. And the music industry did what, and I worked a little bit with Sony Music. I had my copyright hat on, and we did what anybody would do, sue everybody. Shut them down. The music industry went so far as to actually sue their very consumers as well. And we all saw the music industry become quite commoditized. I mean, I can remember going into a store once and seeing a promo where if you bought a 6-pack of Coke, you got a free CD. That basically valued music at zero. Now, maybe music at the time was worth zero because you could certainly get it anywhere you wanted to get it. I mean, it was pretty much free on LimeWire, on Napster, and then on Grokster, and you know, we can go on and talk about all the online places you can get music for free. And so when I saw that happen to the music industry, and I'd like to say I played a part in some really bad strategy with the music industry, I then started reading Clayton Christensen, who's written a series of books on disruption. And it was like through the first book that I was reading, and I had that aha moment where you know you have done something in the past that was just wrong. And then it kind of hit me saying, well, wait a minute, the music industry was like a canary in the coal mine. Do you guys know that term? You know, the coal miners would have a canary in the cage, and if there was any methane in the coal mine, the canary would die, and then you'd have to change course quickly or you'd go down the same path. And I look at the music industry very much as they're the canary in our coal mine, in the video coal mine. They died, and now we better take a different path. So part of the path I wanted to take was, how do you use technology that we see consumers using, add that functionality to the product that we're selling to enhance the value of the product? Why are we letting pirates get away with ease of use and convenience and choice, and we're not integrating all of those great attributes into the things that we're selling? So that's kind of started the journey with Ultraviolet quite a bit. And when I think of what you need to do, 4 points kind of come to my mind that I think about all the time when companies are faced in a very disruptive environment. The first one is, disruption actually enables ordinary people to do what previously only highly skilled users can do. We see this all the time. We saw it with the ease at which consumers could download pirated content, for example. These applications, centralized Napster, decentralized Grokster, made it very, very easy to search, discover, and find, right? So it allowed ordinary people to do what previously only highly skilled people can do. So when I look for adaptive business models, I look for that. Will this technology enable, or the business model enable, ordinary people to do things more easily than they've been doing it in the past? The second thing I look for is that it actually reshapes revenue in a new way. That's kind of good news if you know it's going to happen, but it's kind of bad news because it doesn't mean more revenue. It just means different revenue. It could be less revenue. But what I would argue is that if you don't do something quickly to change direction, it might even be lower revenue. Right? We saw the music industry go all the way down to almost nothing before subscription became their model. I'm not saying that had we known this, we could have changed course, but they certainly would not have shut down a service called mymp3.com, which gave consumers the rights to online music when they could prove that they bought the CD. This is the most difficult one because as technologists, we tend to see technology, and we're so ingrained in it that we think everyone sees it the same way we see it. And so we think that because we can adapt quickly to it, consumers can also adapt quickly to it. And behavior takes a long time to change. I'll give you an example. As the music industry knew they had to do something quickly to react to what amounted to theft of their content and a very disruptive environment, they actually launched back in 2001, 2002, subscription music services, Press Play and Rhapsody. But consumers, subscribe to music. We were used to subscribing to video, but we were never used to subscribing to music. And subscription services only started taking off in the last couple of years. It took 10 years for consumers to actually change their behavior and start actually subscribing to music. So don't try to change behavior. You really have to look at existing behavior and try to keep consumers from having to change too drastically. And the fourth one is you need to find, okay, there it goes. You have to, it's going to be a long day if I have to do this all day. You have to really focus on a consumer need. You know, the example I like to use here actually, and I know there's a bit of contention around Uber here. But Uber, I mean, I don't know how many times I called for a cab and didn't know where it was, didn't know when it was going to pick me up, didn't know what the fee was going to be. And Uber kind of did something that I thought was really interesting. I knew I had to take a car from point A to point B, but now with the Uber app, I could just easily call the car. I knew where it was. It knew where I was, right? So it actually focused on a specific consumer need. This is what I look for when we start adopting new business models. So that's kind of technological disruption, but there's actually what I consider to be 3 different types of disruption. We talked about technology and the way it disrupts. We're going to talk about behavior and cultural disruption. The third one we're not going to talk about, I call parasitic disruption, and that's actually the theft of intellectual property, but that's my copyright lawyer hat on. I'm not going to talk about that today, but let's talk about cultural disruption for a moment. Digital native. We've heard talk about millennials. They're kind of Gen Y. There's another digital native, Gen Z, which is skews even younger. And I like to kind of differentiate between the digital natives and the analog natives. And I don't mean to be morbid, but analog natives are dying by the millions every day. And digital natives are coming into the marketplace by the millions every day. And this is the demo that we focus on. So as I said, there's two different digital natives. There's the Gen Y, that's the millennial. We're going to go in a little bit more detail about the millennial because they're actually in the demographic that advertisers are looking at because they have a lot of purchasing power. The actual Gen Z are skew much younger. We don't actually know what their habits are going to be yet. We're still looking at the Gen Z very, very closely, but we know what the Gen Ys are. Before I leave on the Gen Zs, these are just some numbers on the use of 0 to 8-year-olds in the home. And you can see the growth year over year, 2 years here, that the youngest kids in the home are now using tablets, phones. And again, the impact of that use at an extremely young age is yet to be seen, but we can only imagine what it's going to be. So these are the guys that decided, while the music industry was coming out with super high-res audio, these are the guys who decided they wanted MP3s. Ease of use, quality didn't matter to them, and they actually defined an entire generation of music consumption. And in fact, Kaz Hirai, who's the CEO of Sony, said at a conference, "Isn't it amazing that this entire generation has no idea what music is actually supposed to sound like?" These guys are really confident in their ability. In fact, there's a problem sometimes with the millennials in a workplace because at the youngest age, I don't know what it's like here in Germany, but at least I know in the US, when you join the soccer team, regardless of how well you do, at the end of the season, you will get a trophy. It doesn't matter. And so when they join the workplace, they actually expect a raise. And it doesn't matter how they have been here a year. So it's a very interesting generation to look at. The thing is that their numbers, though, are just amazing. In fact, I've been using this chart for about 4 years now. And if you just look, I wish I could have my pointer here. But if you look, now we're in 2014, which is the last year I used. 64% of the 18 to 49-year-olds are millennials. Baby boomers, we are out of the demo. No one cares about you anymore. They care about these guys, and the numbers are staggering. Again, apologize in advance, this is quite US-centric, but I think the numbers are probably the same numbers worldwide. 86 million millennials are going to define how they spend their money on entertainment. This is pretty obvious if you look at the millennials. They public display and feedback. Even though I am not a millennial, I was posting pictures on Instagram, and I was getting 1 or 2 likes. And then I started posting bottles of beer when I travel, and I was getting 15 to 20 likes. And I was going holy crap, and now the only thing I post is beer. So that feedback from your peers is really important. Constant availability. I forget who said it earlier. I think it may have been Michael. We've done some studies on millennials, and when they have to go into a movie theater and turn off their phone, it creates anxiety because of that disconnection they have with the world. I mean, it's a very interesting demographic, always connected, and of course, we all know it's global. There are no boundaries anymore. In fact, we face that as distributors. There aren't boundaries anymore either. Exclusivity might be, at some point, a thing of the past, especially territorial exclusivity. So this is pretty clear on the consumption of content. I haven't yet put the social piece in because I haven't seen any model yet where there's a social element to consumption. We know it has to be anywhere, anytime, any device. That's kind of the internet and peer-to-peer and torrents have kind of taught us as an industry that we've got to satisfy that need, and I think we are. The social piece I may touch on a little bit later, but the social piece is more interesting to me in the longer term of content distribution, because today we rely on big service providers to distribute content, and I actually see no reason why we shouldn't be relying on our friends for viral distribution of content as well. I've only seen one company developing that model. Maybe I'll talk about it a little bit later, but there's some interesting models out of that as well. So when I think about disruption in the media industry, the disruption isn't, Rudolph talked about it a little bit earlier. There's nothing new about the media industry being disrupted. We can go through every single one of these technologies was a disruptive technology, and every single time the media industry found a way to have growth and profit from this technology. If you remember the Sony Betamax case, the industry thought the world was coming to an end because consumers could now record the entire program being broadcast over the air on television. As you know, the studios brought a lawsuit against Sony, ultimately going up to the US Supreme Court and losing, only to find a multi-billion-dollar industry to grow out of it. So I'm not overly worried about the industry finding growth in new technologies. At least we've always done it in the past. Digital distribution, which we're going to talk about a little bit more here, seems to be a little odd because we thought the growth was going to be much stronger than it actually was. In fact, I would argue that the digital growth has kind of been a little stagnant. And we're going to kind of explore the reasons behind that and maybe find some trends that we can get comfortable with, that there's going to be hope in this new digital environment where consumers ultimately let go of physical completely, of tangible goods, and instead relying on the ability to access their content at any time without having anything tangible, right? And maybe the reason that digital is slow to grow goes back to one of the first things I said was, when you have an adaptive business model, don't expect to change consumer behavior. And maybe I broke my own rule here by thinking that digital was going to grow much faster than it actually has. So some of the things I want to talk about are the reasons why, and I think this is one of the key reasons. And I wish I would have done this for your market as well, but at least in the US market, and I want to focus on a particular model right now. I want to focus on the ownership model. I want to focus on consumers who want to collect content. And the reason I want to focus on that model is because that's where the studios maximize their revenue. They maximize their revenue from the sale of content. And what happened was that there are so many confusing options for consumers that I think it was quite challenging to say, I want to buy content and I'm going to buy Spider-Man because I have a PlayStation in my home, but I also have an Xbox and I also have Amazon over the top. And it's a year later, and I want to watch Spider-Man, and quite frankly, I don't even know where it is anymore. I know it's somewhere on some device, so maybe next time I'll just rent it. So some of the things I want to talk about here in this connection is, if anybody was, when we were launching Blu-ray and HD DVD, right? There was a big format war. And everybody talked about the format war, the format war, the format war is going to just kill Blu-ray. But no one talks about this particular format war. No one talks about the fact that I can buy content from all of these services or watch content from all of these services, and it's not interoperable across device. If I buy it on one platform, I'm stuck on that platform. And no one seems to say, well, this is a format war. And in fact, I would argue that it's because of this format war that we're seeing slow growth. So let's look at some consumer trends, because I think if you look at where the money is flowing, you start to, at least we can develop a theory around consumer comfort. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So the line on the left, this is physical sales of DVDs and Blu-rays. So the line on the left is the sell-through revenue. The line on the right is the rental revenue. And we're looking from 2010 up to 2013. Obviously, the first trend you see is it's declining, right? We can see that. That's a pretty easy picture to see. But if we look at it a little bit differently, we see that in 2010, about 62% of the revenue came from the sale of DVDs and Blu-ray. And in 2013, it's about the same, maybe 66%. So what that tells me, in connection with physical media, consumers are comfortable. They're okay buying it. Most of the revenue comes from the sale of those little plastic discs. We did something right. It worked. And now let's shift over to digital. Again, on the left, the smaller bar here is the sale of digital content, and on the right is video on demand, or the rental of content. And in 2010, what I can tell you is digital was about $500 million. We can see, the good news is, we see growth. We know that. I should compare the two. And what you'll notice is that the growth of digital is not making up for the loss in physical. So overall, home entertainment is declining. But let's look at this number a little bit differently and see what the trend is. 22% in 2010 was revenue coming from digital. So what that meant to me when I looked at that number was, as consumers migrate from physical to digital, they're more comfortable renting. They're not comfortable buying. And that's what that number means, right? Not a good sign for the industry that wants to migrate consumers from physical to digital, because it means a loss of revenue every single time a consumer migrates to digital, because the profit margin on EST, or the sale of content, digitally is much greater than the rental of content. But look at the trend here. It goes up to about 36% in 2013. That's actually a positive trend. And what that means, when I look at that number, the first thing that comes to my mind is consumers are starting to get more comfortable buying digital movies, or movies in digital form, over the top. So what happened? What happened in 2011? What happened in 2012? What happened in 2013? What can we do in 2014? What's the trend going to be? I mean, I'd be really interested to see, does the trend continue? Is it going to be 42% in 2014? Certainly a trend I think that the industry is looking at very closely. Well, in 2010, we asked consumers, what do you like or what don't you like about buying online, right? Because we wanted to try to figure out, well, what can we do to help you? We want to migrate you to digital. We know you eventually will. So what are the things that you're unsatisfied with? And some of the things, if you just start at the bottom here, couldn't move it to non-TV devices, which meant consumers were okay buying it on PlayStation or Xbox. They could watch it on their big TV set. But once it was sitting on the Xbox or the PlayStation, they couldn't watch it on their portable device, on their phone or their tablet. Keeping track of what you own. I touched on this a little bit earlier. It's like, I bought 10 movies. They're across 5 devices. How the heck am I supposed to know where the movie is sitting, what TV I can watch it on? Again, that confusion and dissatisfaction means that, the next time I'm just going to rent it. It's not worth owning it digitally. What happens if you switch your device? If I get rid of my PlayStation, do I lose my content? And I think the answer is probably yes. And if the hard drive crashes, right? I mean, all these issues. It's like, I'm not buying content online. And so, I think what we were pretty good at the selection. You could watch it on TV. And I think the buying experience was pretty good. Easy, a couple clicks on PlayStation or Xbox or Apple, and you could get it. But we weren't too good on the next 3. So the next 3, I might have limited storage in my home, so it would limit the number of movies I could actually buy. I couldn't access it anytime I wanted to on the road, for example. And then what happens if the hard drive crashes? And I think in 2011, what we saw was, we actually saw cloud services starting to be developed by all the key services in the States. And that kind of answered those 3 issues. And it gave consumers a much higher level that if I buy it, at least I know I don't have to store it on my hard drive. If I buy it, at least I know I can watch it almost across many of my devices. I can access it anytime I want. I can keep track of what I buy on that one service. The problem was really that I'm having a problem because the clouds are not operable, or I should say the clouds are not interoperable. They're just a series of siloed clouds. And so what I find is, because the clouds are not operable and they don't talk to one another, if I do buy something and it's sitting up in Amazon, or I do buy something and it's sitting up in PlayStation, I still have to keep track across multiple services. I get locked into a platform, and I can't really change if I want to change. And so we didn't really solve all the problems. We solved some of the problems. And so what we needed to do was to say, okay, well, what happens if I were to look at it a little bit differently? What happens, and this is starting to now launch what is Ultraviolet, but I don't think of Ultraviolet as this brand that everybody has to know about. I really think of Ultraviolet more as, we'll call it digital rights portability. And I think without the digital rights portability, what you end up is a lot more confusion. And it's almost like, I don't know what the law is in Germany here, but in the US, there was Telecommunications Act of 1996, which actually forced mobile service providers to do number portability. Have you guys ever heard the term number portability? You have, right? The idea that if I wanted to switch from Verizon to AT&T, and I'd have to lose my phone number, I just don't know. I don't know how we live that way, quite frankly. And if we went back to that, I think there'd be a revolt, quite frankly, because a phone number is quite personal. It takes a long time for people to know it. And the idea that the service provider actually owned the number and I was, leasing it from the phone service provider, that's crazy. It took an act of Congress to actually change that law in the US. And when I think of Ultraviolet and I think of digital rights, I kind of think the same thing in many ways. I kind of think, when are the consumers going to revolt against the idea that it said buy it, it said own it, I clicked the button. Why is it when I leave the service I can't take my content with me? Now, I don't want to get into a long debate on copyright and first sale and all these other doctrines that scare the crap out of the studios. But I will say that the idea that when a consumer buys something, we can at least put it in their own private locker and they can access it whenever they want, seems to me to be the right thing to do. And again, whether it's Ultraviolet or it's Disney, who rolled out what's called DMA, it doesn't really matter to me. What matters is, in an Ultraviolet environment, when I buy something, I actually can take it where I want to take it. For example, EasyFlix. So I went to Australia. I wanted to watch a movie. I signed up for an EasyFlix account. EasyFlix has no idea who I was until I registered. I linked my EasyFlix account with my Ultraviolet account, and within about 3 minutes, all 300 of my movies appeared in EasyFlix. And now I could watch any of the movies I wanted, that I collected. That seems to me to be a valuable consumer proposition, that it's the movie that I now have an ownership right in, and I feel as though I own it now. It's not a perpetual license, even though if you read the EULA of any of these service providers, I think Amazon EULA said the right I got from Amazon when I bought the movie was indefinite. I think that's how Amazon said it, indefinite. What the hell does that mean? And luckily no one reads the EULA, so that certainly didn't discourage someone from buying it. But the bottom line in Ultraviolet, when I think about it, it's just an authentication service. It's a digital proof of purchase. It knows what I have rights to. And any third party that wants to find out what I have rights to, and even to mine the data of the things that I purchase, can do so simply by becoming part of the ecosystem. The next slide is not appearing. Okay. So the bottom line is, there are all kinds of ways to get my content into my cloud locker. If you bought a Blu-ray disc and it has Ultraviolet on it, I put in a code, it goes into my locker. If I buy it online from an EST service provider, that's an Ultraviolet service provider, it goes into my locker. Again, the value of doing something like Ultraviolet, again, I'm not tied to Ultraviolet, any digital rights portability system I'd be supportive of. it goes into my locker. We've even allowed and done experiments on, well, what about all those DVDs and Blu-rays that I already bought? Can I get those into my locker? And we're actually now to the point with some Walmart stores, you can bring your discs in, they scan them, they put them in your locker. And I'm just now looking at this new technology that allows you to scan the barcode. It's actually just a barcode scanner. It identifies the title of the content from the barcode. And they actually have a back-end service where a human being looks at every single scan and verifies it's actually from a Blu-ray disc. It prohibits the scanning off the computer screen. But that's another easy way we can get consumers to take legacy content and put it into their account. The studios are also okay with if you bought content from a service and the service is not an ultraviolet service but becomes an ultraviolet service, any content that you previously purchased in a proprietary silo can go into the ultraviolet account as well. So we take care of the legacy in that situation. And we're even looking at companies that actually have records of physical goods that they sold you, a prior history conversion to allow you to convert those as well. In other words, taking everything you own today, getting it up in your personal cloud account so you can take that content with you wherever you want to go. I think that solved the next three. Now, this has been slower to roll out than I would have hoped. And I think that's because there's a natural tension between content owners and service providers. Because the bottom line is service providers like an Amazon or a PlayStation or an Xbox, they like the idea that they lock you in and you're less likely to leave if you can't take your content with you. But the bottom line is, from a content provider perspective, proprietary silos actually diminish the value of content. If I buy a DVD, I can play it on any DVD player. I'm not locked into buying it only on Walmart DVD players. I mean, could you imagine if that were the case? That I bought content from Walmart and it only played on a Walmart DVD player? And I went and bought content from Best Buy and it wouldn't play because it was a Walmart player? That'd be a crazy way to launch a content distribution system, and that's what we did on digital. So there's this natural tension. In fact, a good example, you guys familiar with Microsoft and Zune? Remember when Zune launched? I don't know if you guys remember that. It was actually a complete failure, and probably failed for a lot of reasons, not the reason I'm going to tell you, because it was actually like a brick. It was not the most attractive device. But the bottom line is I had 4,000 songs in my iTunes account that I had bought, that I had ripped, that I had downloaded. There's no way I was going to start over again with Zune. But if there were a rights portability back then, and I could take my 4,000 songs and import them into Zune, then yeah, at least I would try it. So that stickiness is a natural tension. I went back, I told you a little bit about number portability. Verizon fought that like crazy in Congress, hoping that it would not be part of the '96 Telecommunications Act, because they like that stickiness. But little by little, I think what we're seeing is when the studios put an ultraviolet token in a Blu-ray disc, and we're seeing physical consumers, or consumers that like physical DVDs and Blu-rays, migrate into digital, they're not migrating into those services that don't offer ultraviolet. So I think what we're going to end up seeing next year is a lot more services join. Videosity, I think, is going to join here. There's other German retailers that will be joining as well. So I think that's going to help. So I talked a little bit about the social aspect of things, and I want to talk, I think, a little bit more on that. So getting recommendations from friends, I think, is fantastic, and we learned a lot about that today on recommendation engines, search and discovery. But when I find what I want to watch from a recommendation from a friend, and a friend, for example, happens to have that movie, maybe a more social way to get revenue is to allow me to actually view it from my friend's library. Now, I know that there are a lot of content providers that are not comfortable with that yet. But our biggest consumer, and this is part of the social part of it, our biggest consumer is what I'll call a dual consumer. Have anybody heard that term, dual consumer? Dual consumer. So when I look at the entire movie-going population, about 1% of the population are pirates. They don't pay for any content at all. 19% are dual consumers. They buy everything they want to collect. They steal everything they want to watch. And the rest of the 80% are just legitimate consumers. It turns out that while a legitimate consumer might buy 4 to 6 movies a year, that dual consumer, the average dual consumer, 40 movies a year, 18 of which they buy, 22 of which they steal. So, well, I mean, it's a pretty valuable consumer, and you don't really want to do anything. I mean, when the studios got together and decided to follow the record industry and sue their consumers, there were a few of us who said, please don't do that, because they're buying more content than anyone else out there. Again, they buy the things they want to collect. And in fact, some may debate here whether sell-through is even viable anymore, with subscription services rolling out and all the available content online. And I would argue that collecting is in our DNA. We collect. I have to assume that 10,000 years ago they were collecting antlers and putting them on their mantle in their cave. So I think it's in our DNA. We even have programs in the US called hoarders, about people that collect so much crap they can't even move around their house anymore. So I think collection is a real part. And when I look at the dual consumer, they collect a lot of movies. So the idea is, if we can get that dual consumer to shift behavior, and if you look at the behavior that I'm talking about, and there's 2 ways to shift it. The dual consumer, again, that ratio of 45 legitimate, 55 illegal, that's the percent of their use on average. If we can get them just to shift that use to 50-50, just some small incremental shift, brings in about $600 million into the industry. If you can get them to migrate their stealing behavior into a borrowing behavior, still paying the content providers for borrowing, brings in about $1 billion into the industry. So if we can create a social environment where these dual consumers, who are the major collectors, socially start engaging with one another in a way that the content providers have to approve it, I totally get that, that's going to be a challenge, then I think we can bring a lot more revenue into the industry, recognizing that not everybody should have to pay full price for a video on demand. And that sounds kind of weird, because if you're a studio, the first thing you're going to think about is, well, that's cannibalistic. Why would I possibly let them get a VOD for less money than what iTunes is charging? Well, the reason is because they're not paying iTunes anything. They're stealing it all. And so what I would certainly argue is that we need to look at a social, viral aspect of the anytime, anywhere, any device matrix, and we need to figure out a way, along with digital rights portability, enabling consumers to have more of a social behavior. It could be as simple as posting clips of the movie they love. That might be something that's more important than just posting the name of the movie I love. Let me clip my favorite scene. So we have a lot of work to do on the social side. But in the end, I'm going to end it with this, and then we'll open up for questions. Clayton Christensen, for those of you who have not yet read his book on Innovator's Dilemma, is his first book. He says good companies don't fail because of these radical new technologies. They fail because of their reactions to these new ideas. And we see this happening almost throughout history. It's not just that we're in the midst of this new technology and broadband and compression and all this kind of stuff, and parasitic disruption, which is, seems to condone the theft of intellectual property. We've seen this throughout history. I mean, we saw the failure of integrated steel mills in the United States, Bethlehem, United. We saw the failure of because we found that recycling steel, which was a much cheaper way to actually produce rebars and L-bars and I-bars and things like this. For those familiar with a service called UPS, I'm sure they're global, They were actually disrupted about 100 years ago. They were actually, the UPS business model when they launched was delivering packages from the city to rural areas. Commuters would take the train into the cities, they'd buy a bunch of packages, and UPS would deliver it back to them so they wouldn't have to take it back on the train. And they were disrupted by the trunk of an automobile where consumers no longer needed them. And so they adapted their business model to more of a B2B model and kind of abandoned the B2C model. And we just see them coming back within the last 10 years to a B2C model again. So disruption isn't just something that we talk about because we have new technologies. Disruption is actually, it happens all the time. And so when you see disruption happening, you really have to look for the opportunities in the disruption, because when you fight against it, which is a very natural reaction, it seems to lead to failure. And I'll leave it at that. I'll open it up to questions, and that's it. Thank you.
If we could turn the lights up so we can see you. If there are any questions for Mitch, I'm going to open it up directly to you guys. I have a couple, but if there's a question, there's one there. Yep. And if we can have a little more light so I can see the audience, that'd be great. Okay.
Mitch Oliver from FiTech. Once somebody is going over the bridge from like the physical product over like signing up for the UV service, does that bring also like a buying change to the person? That meaning like going more for like the next buys will be more digital than physical?
So, yeah, what we're finding with UV consumers is those that switch end up buying a lot more online. 24% of ultraviolet users actually have told us their online buying habits will increase by 24%. And I can tell you from my own habits, well, there's two things that happen. I don't know if it's happening here, but the ability to buy content online in the United States is now available anywhere from 3 to 6 weeks ahead of the Blu-ray.
Yeah.
So there is no option to rent the film in the US. It's not available rental. It's not available video on demand. It's just available EST. And then what the studios are doing, they're pricing it at a very low price during this period. So for me to buy high def at $14, knowing it's going to go into my ultraviolet locker, knowing I can access it across all my devices, it's really easy to just buy it. And you know, I use Vudu as my primary service on my television set, so I know from personal experience my buying habits have increased because it's just so easy. I don't have to, you know, go to a store and buy something and bring it home. And the idea that I'm going to take a disc out of a clamshell and put it into a tray and then close the tray and then open the tray when it's over and put it back in the clamshell, or many times not put it back in the clamshell, and then I'm really screwed because I don't know where it is anymore. For me, those days I'm never buying physical media again.
So for like European customers, they can like buy all the originals from the US too, or like also like geo-locked to some regions. Like, can I buy the original US product? Good question.
Well, it's unlike physical goods, which has a gray market attached to it. There is no gray market in digital. Because if we're not going to release it in a particular territory, it's not available from any service provider in that territory. Now, there may be ways you can get around geofiltering and things like that, so there may be some ways to get around it. But we're not going back to days of regional coding.
Is there another question? Did you have one over there? No, yes? Back there, Peter.
Regional coding sucked, didn't it?
Yeah, Peter
Oh, yeah, 'cause
Engelmann.
it's like, where were you in the world?
I
It
have
didn't
one
work.
question.
I can say that now because I don't work for Sony, so I... Oh, no, it's terrible.
If you also think about individual strategies in distribution regarding the social involvement of the social factor, individual strategies for the type of movies, what I think, I don't have any numbers, but that there are certain genres and certain type of movies are particularly suffering from stealing. For example, there was always these horror movies, and over the last years I have seen some disappointments by distributors, where in former days a horror movie was always, it was cheaply produced and it would make its money in the end, but I think these type of genre movies are especially prone to stealing because you have that young, technical, skilled audience.
Yeah, no, obviously the genre of the movie does matter with respect to theft of motion pictures, but we have a piracy window. And we're going to have a piracy window for a long time because that's the 3 to 4 months. It's in the theater. It's not available at home. It's available online probably the Monday or so following the Friday release. I said once I was with my boss at Sony Pictures, and I said, yeah, those pirates, you know, they work 24/7, not 9 to 5. And she looked over at me and she goes, you only work 9 to 5?
Have to be
But
careful.
so the bottom line is, yes, it's a problem. But you know, I'll talk about collapsing the windows for a moment because you know earlier we did talk a little bit about there's some experimentation around the fringes, Arbitrage, Veronica Mars. I mean, there are some movies that have gone day and date.
Yeah.
But for the most part, the studios don't control that. The exhibitors control that.
Yeah.
And the moment you want to go day and date, the exhibitors are going to say, well, go find a screen because we're not going to exhibit your film. Because they want that exclusive window, and they want it. I mean, there's restrictions on when you could even advertise in the home entertainment market because it's that paperback effect. That if I know it's coming out on paperback in a week, I'm not going to buy the hardcover. If I know it's going to be in home video in 3 weeks, I'm not going to the movie theater. Of course, at that point, it's probably out of the theater anyway. But the theater owners want that, 3 to 4 month. So we'll experiment around the edges, right? Just like we have in the past. But those films. When you think about a theatrical release, meaning I have a distribution agreement with a Regal or with an AMC, those weren't distribution agreements. Those studios actually four-walled. They rented the theater space, paying the theater a flat fee. It's called a four-wall.
Yeah.
It wasn't a traditional distribution agreement. So it's really not up to the studios to go day and date. But what I will say is that we have to manage that piracy window. We have to do things in the piracy window that make sense. And there are some technologies that are in use that will prohibit the playback of a motion picture in a Blu-ray player, for example. It'll prohibit the playback of that motion picture in a PlayStation and an Xbox 360 and other platforms. And many studios are using that technology on their theatrical prints. And I think we just have to manage that window.
Another one? No? Well, I have just a quick one then.
Yeah.
I mean, how many ultraviolet users are there now? Can you say that?
Yeah, sure. So we have about 20 million worldwide ultraviolet users. We have about 102 million rights tokens in the cloud. And that's a really important point. Of the 20 million, we have about, I would say, 1.5 million that I would consider to be the Uber users. These are ultraviolet users that collect a lot of content. And that's a really important number because one studio, for example, is kind of scanning the rights lockers of some of these ultraviolet users. And I would tell you the movie, then you'd know the studio, and I'm not supposed to say, but they're coming out with a sequel, number 3. So they're looking to see how many ultraviolet users have the first movie and the second movie in their locker. No.
Oh.
First movie and second movie, right? And then what they're going to do is every single time that user is surfing around the internet, they're going to be seeing trailers, almost said it, for the third movie. So we're starting to get to the point where we can mine some data. But there's another really important thing about that 102 million rights token number. If you're a new service, and you want to launch an online service because you've got a great idea, if you're not ultraviolet, I don't know how you launch. If you are ultraviolet and can tap into those 102 million rights tokens in the cloud, then all of a sudden when a user comes into your platform that's an ultraviolet user, your locker in that new service is automatically populated with all your movies.
Right.
So I think from an innovation standpoint, it's going to help third-party services get into the marketplace.
Okay. Very interesting talk. I think that was very enlightening. I think we all learned a lot. Could you please join me in thanking Mitch Singer? So now, before we close this conference, I'm going to ask Peter to come back up. Yeah? Give us the last words.
Thank you.